All right, Kyle. Welcome to another day. We haven't talked in a while, and there's been a lot of interesting things that have gone on.
For sure.
And I have a hot take to start it off.
Let's do it.
Should TikTok be outlawed in the U.S.?
For me, I'm going with no. I don't see why.
For me, I'm going to go with a no as well. I have not been able to figure out why. I've seen this coming and going.
I mean, for starters, banning anything requires justification. This is the United States of America, not China. Like, you owe me a reason. So what's the reason?
We're going to have to go back and forth playing some kind of...
Devil's advocate, yeah.
Yeah, we're both saying we don't see the reason, but let's try to screenplay the reason out. I suppose you want to start with... I'll start being the person that says we need to. How about that? I have some idea of why.
Okay.
So first, apparently Chinese nationals can see see the data that is being harvested from TikTok. Okay. Chinese nationals, now again, this is me playing a role here. Doesn't mean I agree, but Chinese nationals.
But what does that mean? Does that mean they watch our videos? So what?
Right. So Chinese nationals shouldn't see our data. They shouldn't see it at all because that means that they're pulling information out of that data and can learn. So hard.
What data are you talking about, though?
I can't play this role.
Well, you're on the right track. I mean,
I know. It's a tough one.
The only thing to be worried about here is the data, but what data?
Okay, so the data is locations of people.
Okay, lat longs. All right, that's something.
Yeah, lat longs, the low shit. I like to say lon lat, by the way, because that's XY, and there's a debe about this in the GIS community.
This is your industry. I'm going to follow your lead. Long lat it is.
It's hilarious. It's like a whole sort of sub-meme about whether or not it's lat long or lon lat. And it really is lat lon, but anybody who codes usually does it as lon lat. Anyway, it's because latitude is Y, longitude is X, but we say lat long, lon, right?
What about the people from Australia?
That's YX.
Okay.
Well, it's still the same. It's still longitude is Y, no matter, it's just 0 to 360, but...
I don't feel strongly about the order, but I do feel strongly that I don't want my government or a foreign government knowing all my long lats.
Okay, yeah. Exactly. So that this is me assuming that is one of the pieces of data they're collecting. I can't see a reason why you wouldn't collect that, right?
Sure. Or, I mean, if nothing else, the IP is there. Because you could inspect the source code and say, does it ask the phone for the GPS and all that kind of stuff? Maybe it doesn't do that, but with just on accident, you're getting people's IP addresses, which are a proxy for location.
Okay, maybe there's some control over whether or not people give their app location access, and I suspect that a lot of people do. And then secondly, though, the IP address, yes, it gives you a general location, but more importantly, if you know someone actually works for a federal agency, if you start to gather that data, you might be able to get a sense of the activity at the federal agency or be able to better get a sense of where critical infrastructure might be or places to target. How about that?
Well, let me one-up you. The Chinese spies are going to figure out the accounts of young women, kids on TikTok who have parents in the military, and then know when they go to a vacation location that military person is out, in some cabin on a lake, and that's the time to approach them to try and compromise them or blackmail them or something.
Exactly. That's actually reasonable. That's in the line of what I'm thinking is maybe the reason, but they're not selling it well in the media. They're just saying data.
I mean, if you're that important of a person, they should give your family special phones. But anyway.
Yeah. And they have protocols for that, though, when you have clearances.
Sure. Yeah.
They have protocols for who you call. You report things if you've been approached. I mean, if someone wanted to approach you, they don't need to wait for you to be on vacation anyway.
Fair enough, yeah.
Just get them in their day-to-day life. I think more importantly, the volume of data with regards to people's movement and patterns and those who might be working at critical, military or hospitals. I mean, that's pretty critical, or energy production.
You could identify all the staff. So, like, if they want to invade us, they could know where everyone who works at a power plant lives and take them all out.
Maybe that, or they could identify key pieces of information that might, let's say they have a sense of the location. They've proven that there's these 5 people that work at the Pentagon, I'm sure there's classified rooms in the Pentagon, but just like any building where you have a classified room, you also have an unclassified room, and you go in and out of them, and you're not allowed to bring your cell phone in, etc. But what happens when you know these 5 people work at the Pentagon? So now you've got a rough location. If they're sharing their location information, you've got a rough location. Now you can say, okay, well, let's look at people that location-wise might be nearby them. Now let's start tagging them as likely working at the Pentagon, right?
This assumes that they're all on TikTok, but okay.
This assumes they're all on TikTok. Well, at least, let's say 5% of the people who enter the Pentagon are on TikTok.
Okay, sure, that's probably right.
Maybe reasonable. That's 5% more than what you knew earlier. As TikTok becomes more popular, it's going to be harder to control for that. And not everybody has the wherewithal to click no when it says ask app not to track or don't allow for location. Most people just click allow generally. That's what I think. And even the smartest of us who aren't involved in computer science or cybersecurity make mistakes.
Of course.
So it's entirely feasible that they're gathering data about the locations and the who works at key infrastructure locations. I don't know how valuable that is, because really then you have to start to going to the compromise, right? What's the compromise? What are you going to do with that data?
But it's not unique to TikTok. I mean, you could just as well own 10,000 little tiny apps spread all over the App Store, do the same thing, or have a popular website, or, there's lots of ways to do this.
You're right. Like, okay, let's say, for instance, Facebook is, U.S. data centers mostly for U.S. citizens, and it is under U.S. law, whereas China is not. So, let's take these 2 gigantic platforms and compare the 2. Why are they not panicking about locations with regard to Facebook, but they are about China? It's because or not China, but TikTok. It's because it's China. What will they do with the data? I guess I'm assuming we're not as worried about what Facebook does with the data. But then you ask yourself what you just did, which is, what about all these small apps? Let's just say TikTok didn't exist. What about having 100 semi-popular apps and collecting and harvesting that data?
It's easy to build that portfolio. I can give you as a sidebar if you ever want to know.
You could just slice and dice useful apps into a useful big app into smaller and smaller apps that provide some utility. And people think it's pretty simple and say, yeah, sure, you can track me.
Yeah.
I'm still struggling to think what data is there that makes it key to ban it or shut it down. Now, I do want to mention that this is not hyperbole. The FCC commissioner asked Google and Apple to ban TikTok. That was in late June.
So what's the justification, though?
I haven't read it. I'm just trying to do this cold. I have not read any compelling dissertation on why, but TikTok does say that they're working on protecting user data, which, it's China. How much can they really protect user data?
But I mean, what company wouldn't make that statement?
What do the companies
right?
say?
You might as well that.
Apple and Google?
No. You just said TikTok says they're working on protecting user data. Like, there's not a company in the world that wouldn't say, me too, right? We are also doing that. Everyone's doing that.
Yes, exactly. And I don't, first off, it's China again, so I don't really trust them. I mean, look what Facebook did. They protected user data and then released that data set to Cambridge Analytica, which allowed them to correlate people. So, not buying that. Those are cheap words.
So when Trump brought all this up, he cited national security.
Did he?
Yep.
But what? What part of is it what we're talking about? Like, okay, let's say let's think of another idea. These are all videos. What if you took a video in a place where you're not supposed to, or in a place that you think isn't identifiable but somehow is identifiable?
If I accidentally uploaded something that revealed the national secret, it doesn't matter what platform I put it on.
That is true. It doesn't matter what platform you put it on, but accidentally uploading it is a concern. And it's just the same for YouTube. But at least with YouTube, they probably have the mechanism to recall that, whereas TikTok, they do not. I'm playing devil's advocate here. I'm stretching. But
so I think it really comes down to this being a super app, and I'm seeing that word come up as I'm looking around at some of the more official things, like what Brookings wrote about it. And that becomes interesting, because I often am trying to make up my mind about stuff like this. Like, if some person puts up a random website that's sort of slanderous and has fake news, like, who cares? You know, him and his 4 buddies all look at it. But if it's a major publication, you know, somewhere along the lines things change, right? I don't know if it's once 10,000 people see it or whatever, but by having a large volume, you lose certain rights, I guess is the only way to say it. A little bit you do. And this is one of the biggest platforms by the numbers. Where is that line about something has gotten so big that now it's okay for the government to meddle in it?
Yeah.
And how much meddling is allowed?
I agree. And when I read these articles, let's look at some of the interesting quotes. FCC commissioner called on Apple and Google to remove TikTok from their app store for its pattern of surreptitious data practices. Okay, great. I expect them to unpack that, right? Surreptitious data practices. Carr's letter notes that, quote, collect vast troves, end quote, of sensitive data from its, quote, millions of American users. Here's a big quote. TikTok is owned by Beijing-based ByteDance, an organization that is beholden to the Communist Party of China and required by Chinese law to comply with the PRC's surveillance demands. Through leaked audio recordings, last week's BuzzFeed news report revealed that ByteDance officials in Beijing have repeatedly accessed the sensitive data that TikTok has collected from Americans after those U.S. users downloaded the app through your app stores. Everything is seen in China, a TikTok official said in the recordings, despite the fact that TikTok has repeatedly represented that the data it gathers about Americans is stored in the United States. Carr noted that the app was downloaded from the App Store and Google App Store nearly 19 million times in the first quarter. There's nothing in here about what data they collect.
Yeah, I really just want something to sink my teeth into. Yeah, for all I know, Xi Jinping said, hey, I want Britney Spears' private photos, which I don't think he has a right to, but I'm less concerned about that than this looming threat.
I mean, are they calling sensitive data my videos of me dancing? And what's the sensitive data?
That's fair. It's a weird labeling, but that would be fair, right? I mean,
but I put it on a public
private
platform.
Thing. I don't care if you're naked or dancing or whatever. You can feel that. Oh yeah, if you put it on the public site, then what do you care?
Yeah, but they don't harvest all. Like the iPhone won't even let an app harvest the iPhone photos.
It must. Yeah. I see. No. Okay. I drew the conspiracy line a little broadly. I assumed there were some private videos, even when I said photos on the app. But either way, I mean, it must be more than just the videos. It must be that there is what I would broadly call like analytics tracking data. So you know a lot of this, I'm sure, but for our listeners, when you start to build a website or an app or something like that from scratch, you know you need analytics. You got to track people. And you want to do that responsibly and all this kind of stuff. But what generally happens is the first developer says, let me send a packet of information to the server, to the mothership, that has everything I can grab. And everything is everything. You know, any sort of bit of metadata sitting around that the framework or the operating system offers up, they grab it, stick it in a packet, and send it to the server. And that'll contain potentially private things. It's not really malicious. It's more negligent or thoughtless, you know, that the first developer just sent you everything. And that's how a lot of systems get built. And there's no, blueprints, there's no standard, and people are afraid to change stuff. So forever and ever, lots of data that doesn't need to be transferred gets transferred. That stuff gets built that way. So maybe they've been just by design collecting broadly, and now it's sitting somewhere. That could be the complaint.
Well, I did find in the tweet from Brendan Carr, who's the FCC commissioner, and a subtweet of it, it said TikTok doesn't see its users' dance videos. Doesn't just see its users' dance videos. It collects search and browsing histories. Okay, of course. Like every app on the web does that.
Within TikTok, though.
Right? Keystroke patterns. Facebook does that.
Within their own app, though.
Unless they're not allowed to within their app. Yeah. Biometric identifiers like facial recognition. You're uploading a video.
Sure.
Right? Draft messages and metadata. And totally normal again. Google saves your draft messages.
You want them to.
Plus, it has collected the text, images, and videos that are stored on a device's clipboard. That's probably the ugliest one.
Yeah, that's problematic. It's a gray area, but I consider the clipboard... Man, I wish there was like a Supreme Court case on this. It's really interesting. I do believe your clipboard is your private information.
I do too, because you haven't acknowledged it. You haven't acknowledged giving that over.
I haven't pasted. Even if your app technically can grab it, I should have to paste it before you get it.
Yeah, I'm surprised that Apple hasn't put a feature in to prevent that.
It's too big for Apple. JavaScript allows it. You can just grab the clipboard.
Yeah, I mean, JavaScript is how you interpret it by the rendering engine and the JavaScript engine that's embedded within the browser. So you could easily put something in there that says, hey, you must acknowledge this trying to copy data from your clipboard.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to fork V8.
I mean, it's complicated, but I'm surprised.
It's a mess. If they tried to change that, it would be hard.
Yeah, but between Apple and Google, well, Google probably does the same thing.
If Apple, Google, and Microsoft all got together and the open source Linux world, like, we could change this, but we're just kind of stuck where it is, I'm afraid.
Well, I mean, the Linux world would say absolutely yes, because they're hyper focused on security most of the time. They would say, let's do it.
Never underestimate the Linux community's ability to be pedantic about some very minuscule idea.
Well, that's true. Well, all right. So I think that's the bad one. But this talk of banning, why not just work on the issues?
Yeah, tell us the violation. What is it they shouldn't collect? Like, everything you read off is stuff you would require to run an application.
Par for the course.
You don't want to save the draft emails, then if you force me to not save the draft emails, all I'm going to do is inconvenience users saying you're about to lose this,
Right.
And I mean, you might have a clearance, you're more into government stuff than I am, but correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure you cannot send official government top secret correspondence over TikTok, right? That's not allowed?
Correct, and you wouldn't even be on TikTok. It's probably a blacklisted site. I mean, the internet's not even connected to the standard internet. It's air-gapped. So first off, you wouldn't be able to copy and then accidentally paste or have your clipboard read while you're on TikTok. It's just not going to happen.
All right, but here's the angle on it. Let's go back to Xi Jinping, and he wants to get private access to Britney Spears' account. If she's written a draft message, maybe something with personal information in it she's thinking about releasing, never does, he may have read it already. That's not right.
Say that one more time. Sorry.
Somebody in the CCP picks an American citizen, in my example, Britney Spears, and they go to ByteDance. They say, you have to do what we say. Give me access, private secret access to all her data, which includes that list you gave, like her draft messages. So what if she was drafting some, sensitive message and decided not to release it, but they've already read it?
I mean,
that's a huge invasion of privacy.
Sure, it is. It isn't, and we agree on that. The clipboard.
So we have a super app. Even if the app says we're going to try and behave, we have rules, they have to be do what the Communist Party tells them to do, right? In the U.S., if the government goes to Apple and says unlock the phone, Apple says no. That doesn't happen in China.
There's two things here. So we focused on security of the U.S. government, which I think is what primarily is driving this. But what about the security of people, which is what you were saying? Like, let's say Britney Spears goes and composes something that's sensitive.
Yeah.
The point is that sensitive message, which is being auto-saved, is more likely to be leaked on Chinese servers because they're not beholden to us than it is on American servers where Apple or Google or otherwise is very protective of user rights.
American companies operate within the American law, and we have a pretty good precedent for privacy here. We have the inverse of that in China.
So to take your example, that's a famous person. Let's talk about a non-famous person who just happens to work at HP. It's not top secret. Maybe they're doing some cool stuff.
Steal the IP.
Copy something into their clipboard that's IP related, PDF file, whatever it is, saying, hey, Bob, you need to take a look at this.
Looks like an SSH key. Yeah.
Right. It looks like an SSH key. Okay. So I think we nailed it personally. I think that's when you get to that portion of it, copying from the clipboard, I think that is, I'm not saying they need to ban it, but we need to come up with a solution that doesn't let that happen. I wouldn't go so far. I mean, the quick answer is ban it.
Ban which part? TikTok or copying the clipboard?
TikTok. But copying the clipboard is going to take longer to solve, right?
Yeah.
But I do think we should as
and it's separate from TikTok. I think there's a very interesting conversation to be had there, but it has nothing directly to do with TikTok.
Okay. Well, that's another episode then.
Yeah. To me, the only ground you have to stand on is if you say this is a super app, whatever that means.
You know what it means? It's a great way to make people pay attention. That's what that is.
So, well, yeah. I mean, I think it's actually a good term in the same, just like what the Supreme Court says, they're not going to give you the definition of pornography, but you know it when you see it. I think that's appropriate here. That I don't know exactly what it means to be a super app, but TikTok is one of them. And a super app is different from a non-super app. So let's have more conversations about it.
So I think we both agree, no, we shouldn't. But when we start to unpack it, actually, surprisingly, I think there's a good argument likely for it. And I think it focuses around security, in particular government security.
Yeah.
And people's security. I just don't think they've made a solid argument in the public's mind to overcome the idea that people would lose TikTok.